When you think of ego, do you think about the loudest person in the room? And I'm being very loud right now, intentionally. Or do you think about the quietest person in the room? So, what if the real barriers for women leading with confidence isn't a lack of skill, but it could be an unmanaged ego that's silently shaping how we speak, decide, and show up in the world? Today's conversation reveals how ego patterns quietly limit women's influence and how mastering them can unlock clarity, presence, and your power. Welcome, Christie Garcia. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Vicky, for having me. I'm really excited to visit with you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. And ego is such a fascinating topic. I mean, it really is, right? And you see it so much in leadership of any discipline and how it can derail or how it could even potentially amplify. So I'm excited to tap into your brain today and learn more about your perspective on ego and how people might tend to show up differently. But before we go there, give us a little bit of insight on your background. What led you to this place of studying and working with ego?
Great question. So I actually started this journey kind of selfishly, just on my own personal journey, never thinking it would turn into this massive business, to be honest. I was just always eager to learn. I was a sales rep for a medical company. And I just remember being very anti getting into leadership. And I didn't really know why, but after a while, it started to dawn on me. I started to realize that everybody gets into leadership. They kind of have this struggle for 2 or 3 years. They don't really feel that confidence anymore. They don't feel like top of their game anymore. And I never really understood why. And so the more I started digging into my own personal growth and doing just my own self-awareness journey and leadership growth as well, I started to learn more about the ego and those unconscious habits, mindsets, beliefs, behaviors, but then also the lack of training around it when you get to these leadership roles. You know, you get into training in the old school way to do things. This is the training model for leaders. Go do it. And it really was cookie cutter and it wasn't very personalized. It was kind of just a standard expectation where I just felt that was lacking. So I started getting more curious, you know, how do we change this? How do we transform leadership into a deeper purpose and more meaningful connections within? How to bring humans back to business. That was kind of my biggest goal. Is I didn't want to just get back into leadership and do more robotic stuff and just start being the boss. And so I started really digging into that. And I learned about this tool called the Leadership Circle. It was an assessment tool that was created by the Executive MBA program of Notre Dame. And it really resonated deeply with me personally. It was after my fall. Just to backtrack real quick, I had a 30-foot fall when I was 30 years old. And I realized that was really a life-changing experience, not just because of the fall, but 2 weeks later, I never cried. I never had a moment about it. It was kind of like I just moved on. And the day that I fell, I wiggled my fingers, I wiggled my toes. The ambulance got there. I told the paramedic, I'm good. Just, let's go do this as quickly as we can. I have a party to get to. And it really was this weird outer body experience. But as I started to go on with life 2 weeks later, I realized that that's not normal. Most people don't do that, and you shouldn't do that because that is not in touch with reality. And I was really curious why. Why was I so disconnected? And that's really when I started to recognize my own ego. My ego, the controller and the protector, really makes me out of touch with the emotions that are real. And I'm fine. I'm good. I move fast. I think fast. I act fast. So there's no time to deal with that. That just slows us down. That just takes away productivity. We don't need that. And the reality is we do need that because it is part of us and it impacts our leadership. It impacts our choices. It impacts ultimately the day, at the end of the day, are we fulfilled?
Yeah.
And that was probably the biggest life-changing moment where I realized, there's a lot of people living my life. When I was in medical sales, I remember during my breaks, I would go sit with patients that were by themselves. And I never really understood why they were by themselves coming from a big family. And it was the consistent story. I worked so much. I tried to provide for my family, but they were gone by the time I was retired, or I was too busy wrapped up in the things that I didn't put the people first. And it was that story after story after story. And most of the people I was talking to at that time were middle-aged men. Well, we now live in a world that women are just as busy, just as crazy, just as committed. And I was living that life. And ironically, that was my biggest fear. It's waking up one day by myself.
Yeah.
And I was living, that was going to be the story if I didn't stop and reroute and get on a path that was fulfilling everything. I was fulfilling my career goals. I was fulfilling my success need. I just was not filling my personal wants and desires. So that's
Wow.
really how it got started.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that because
Mhm.
I think you just described probably 90% of our audience. I mean, I think we do get on that hamster wheel and it's really hard to get off of it.
It is.
Yeah.
It
And
is.
one of the things that you talked about as well is moving as a leader from this I to we and that real struggle that happens. I say this a lot myself, right? Because I see it when I'm doing leadership development with different companies. You know, you've been such a fantastic solo contributor. And then all of a sudden the company says, oh, we want you to lead a group of people and
Yes.
make sure they're just like you, right? And so what's wrong with that picture, Christy, in your mind?
The biggest struggle with that mindset is one, if you're a controller, you go in there and you think you're the only one that can, do the job. So you're the VIP of your team and you never learn to truly delegate or pass the baton and train. I think as a complier, it's kind of the opposite where you might tend to be so worried about not being liked that you can't hold people accountable because your whole like I just need people to like me and then I'm safe. And so it really is just a mental game that we have to train ourselves to say, hey, where is the value here? Finding the good. If you're a controller, your compliers are probably your exact opposite and they're great. They're going to do exactly what you tell them to do. But if you don't tell them what to do, they're not going to fulfill your expectations. And vice versa, if you're a complier leader and you have a controller and you're trying to, micromanage them or you want them to talk people, importance with you, they're not. They want to get to that finish line as fast as possible and they need to run. And so just kind of knowing the value that you bring to the table is important, but teaching people how to shift. It's not I win, because if you get to the finish line by yourself as a leader or as a parent or as a spouse, you don't win. Nobody wins. And so you have to make sure that everybody's getting there with you. And that's truly slowing down, making sure you're getting people on the freight train with you. Because you can move fast, you can think fast, but if they're not on the train with you, you're just going fast and you're hoping for the win, but that successful win as a leader is not there.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just creates often a lot of confusion, complexity, and frustration where people just go, yeah, I don't want to do that because it doesn't align. And as a leader, then you feel like, okay, what's wrong with these people instead of taking a look at yourself? And so, really understanding, I think, what message is talking, that can help you navigate so much cleaner and keep people engaged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The communication is huge.
Yeah, it is. So you redefine ego as something that affects both the outspoken leader and the quiet high performer. So why do you think unmanaged ego shows up differently, and especially for women in senior leadership roles?
The ego is a funny thing. It's our unconscious habits, mindsets, and beliefs. It's been designed since we were children. And at one point, it protected us. At one point, it served us. It got us to this point of leadership, this point of success. And there is a point, if we don't learn how to manage it, it starts to hold us back. It starts to push people away. It starts to build up walls. It starts to have resentment. Again, we end up at the finish line by ourselves and we're really confused why, because it's not our intentions. And so bringing that awareness is really key. I think the biggest thing that happens, I don't want to say just for women. I get this question all the time, but when we're talking ego, men have the same egos. They are all motivated by the same things. They might look different and sound different, but they're all the same insecurities when we start breaking them down. And so I think there's just as many complying men as there are complying women. There's just as many managing and over controlling men as there are over controlling and micromanaging women. And so I think it's really recognizing what is your ego type and how is it holding you back. The ego is both our gift and our weakness. And when we can really recognize our overused strengths and where we're crossing that point, like where is our communication serving us? Where is it becoming a soapbox? Where is our need to be liked and to go along to get along serving us? And when is it just becoming a passive yes, and I'll do whatever you ask me to do because that's my job? So I think it's really recognizing the individual that yourself, like where are your strengths and really breaking them down. It is a very unconscious thing. I have so many women that I coach And they'll start in this program like, yeah, I'm aware. And, my team really can use this, or my boss is a real big jerk. And when we start to break down ownership, here's the thing, we can't change other people. So as a leader, you can only change yourself. But when you change your own approach, you can then change how other people show up as well. Because egos
Absolutely.
respond to egos. So when one ego shows up, even if it's a quiet, passive shutdown, that's an ego. Someone else is going to respond to that, whether they get more aggressive to try to re-engage you, or whether they get more complying to try to get on the same page as you. They respond to people based on the egos that are in the room. And so when we can recognize, how is our leadership ego showing up? Is it, shutting down our team members because we're just telling them what we want them to do, and it's exciting and it's engaging and everybody's on board, but they leave the room and they go out there and be like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah,
Why,
exactly.
why are we doing that? And then all of a sudden you've got human drama because no one's really bought into what you said, because you were talking so fast and you moved so fast and nothing landed, which is a very big tactic for strong, dependent or independent women, for sure. And so I think, again, that's the biggest part, is owning the ego traits that you have, and then just recognize, where are you crossing over? I like to call it the 33% sweet spot. When you hit 33%, that's your fullest strength. When you cross over that point, that's usually when you start to get over controlling.
Mm.
You start to get more stubborn. You start to get more aggressive or more passive. You start to overcommit instead of saying no when you should, that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess where my head goes is, we have some amazing leaders in the world.
Mhm.
And
100%.
listen, I mean, the reality of it is, this is such a critical time in our world where leaders have more complexity and demands on them than they've ever had, right?
100%.
And so you do have to have big shoulders where there's a lot of expectation on you. But what about those leaders who have actually no concept, right? Because what you're describing is somebody who's aware. So if somebody's not aware, how do you help them start to recognize some of those ego patterns?
I love that question. And I'll clarify, 95% of the time, we are not aware. So there are not a lot of aware people in the world. Don't feel like you're a bad person if you are not aware. I have new academies start all the time, and no one is aware day one. They all think they are. I promise you, come day 10 and day 20, they're like, whoa, I had no idea. So it's very, very common for all of us to be unconsciously going through the motions. That's just part of our subconscious brain. It just does what it does. These are old patterns. These are old habits. Some are good, some are bad. That's why the ego's not always bad. Sometimes it works for you, but there's a point where it doesn't. And so what I like to say is, let's just figure out, is your ego showing up 70% of the time, or is it showing up 90% of the time? Either way, let's shrink that percentage down a little bit. And
Right.
so the first step is really self-awareness through external feedback, because these are unconscious. It's really hard for you to diagnose your own ego. The book that I just wrote, that Your Ego is Showing, it definitely helps point out some of the traits and the behaviors and the tactics, so that you can definitely start to see those in real time, and it breaks down each ego type. So that is a step one. Then you really have to take it externally, and you have to start asking for feedback. You have to start encouraging feedback. One of the ego traits that we all have, no matter which ego type you are, it doesn't like the truth. It doesn't like hearing you're good, bad, and ugly. And the reality is if we don't hear our good, bad, and ugly, we can't possibly manage our ego, because we're in denial. And so when we start to ask for the truth, we have to really encourage and empower people to give it, depending on our history with how we respond to feedback. Some of us get defensive, some of us shut down. That's all normal. But the reality is, your history has kind of dictated how people feel when they give you feedback. That she's either going to accept it or she's not going to accept it. She's going to get mad and angry, so I'm not going to say anything. And when you start to invite it, and then you praise for it, even if it hurts, even if it stings, you say, thank you. That was incredibly valuable, and I appreciate you for that honesty. Especially the higher up you go in leadership, the less feedback you hear.
Yes.
So
Very
you
true.
might think you're doing a great job, but down at the bottom, at the dinner tables of your employees, they're talking about all your ego tactics that you're not aware of. And so by inviting feedback and then be grateful for it, that's really how you deepen this awareness that we're talking.
Love that. Love that. And it is hard, right? I mean, we've seen situations like 360s are a common thing in leadership to get that feedback. And you will see executives often will be like, that's not me. Like, they were talking about somebody else, or I don't do that. And to your point, I think that consciousness is so important because there is so much that we're not, because it's also the interpretation of the other person, right?
100%.
What space they're in and how they actually are receiving the communication between you, right?
Absolutely. Perception is not truth, but it is reality. So I always tell my clients, like, the ego is 100% perception. It's your perception of how you think you're showing up. It's others' perception how they receive you. And the impact is never intentional. And so when you can connect those dots and bridge that gap to where you're more intentional, or at least aware enough to recognize, did your intention land how you wanted it to? A lot of times we're not going slow enough. We're not present enough with the people in front of us, that we don't recognize when we shut someone down. We don't recognize when we're holding someone back because we're not delegating. We don't recognize when we're not praising or giving validation enough to someone who has an ego that's saying, I don't even think my boss likes me, but you think they're amazing. And so it's just those little changes that make a big difference. It's really the human side of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that, to me, that's the most important side, right?
100%.
You're,
And we
you're
all get
working
busy,
with
so we
others.
forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you've mentioned the complier, the controller, the protector. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. So, protector ego often shows up as perfectionism. You were sharing that in your book. So what's the hidden cost when women fall into this, realm of nothing is ever good enough? They're always like editing or correcting. And so the perception being, doesn't matter. I can never please this person, man or woman, doesn't matter. But how do you manage that, especially in those male dominated environments?
So, one of the things that I love about the ego is once you start to recognize the different ego types, it really helps you navigate different personalities. A lot of times we shut down, especially if you tend to be more of a complier to certain ego types, then you probably shut down to that more aggressive communicator, male or female, but typically we like to associate this with a male energy, a more masculine energy. Controller protectors are more masculine. And so when you have that type of leader, it does tend to shut you down more. And it does tend to push, make you question your quality and your value and all those things. What I always like to tell a complier is, first you have to dissect what part is yours, right? We cannot take ownership of a whole situation. We cannot take zero ownership. Everybody plays a role in every single conversation, every single relationship, every single moment of our life. We play a role. And so if there is someone who is more aggressive in their energy and their communication style, as a complier, are you taking that personal? Are you making that about you? Are you reading into that in a way that's not really, again, the reality, but it's your perception? I had a client not too long ago that she's a complier protector, so quiet, so her need is to be right, but she also needs to be liked. And so she had a new boss that came in. He's a controller protector. And he had a military background, so very intense, very direct. And so she had a complier boss before that who was very likable, very charming, very friendly. Within a week, she thought she was terrible at her job. She thought she had to quit. She thought she was getting fired. And she went so small. And it was so fascinating because she's a very confident woman. She's top of her game. She's in this program because the company really sees her growing. And it was interesting because this ego type shut her down. But this is what happens based on our past, based on our stories, our old belief systems, certain ego types shut us down. So for her, she had male figures in her life that shut her down, that was too aggressive, that didn't, she was always wanting to please them. And so she didn't feel like she could be validated by this person. She needed this guy to give her permission and validation to show up. And it was really fascinating because his way of doing that was saying, you're better than this. Step up your game. I want this from you. I want this from you. Never told her she's doing anything wrong or bad, but she wanted to hear you're doing good. And she needed his permission. And so it's really recognizing, where is your ego shutting you down and making you play small when you've already given permission to show up. You've been given a seat. If you have a leadership title, a management title, you've been given a seat, show up. But that's ego management, right? We have to train it and we have to believe it ourselves. That's what I love about this work the most, is when we start to recognize the ego, we can then have this authentic confidence. Sometimes the ego puts a fake confidence on us and we fake it till we make it. And this facade of I can do this. But inside we're like, oh, am I really good enough? I'm such a fraud. I've got this going on. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. And you're constantly questioning yourself. When you start to recognize the ego's talk, then you can actually show up. You get to just be you and you get to take your seat. You get to speak your truth. You get to show up. And sometimes that's bold and sometimes that's quiet, and both are okay. And I think that's the truth of this. And so, the three egos, you've got your controller, your protector, and your complier. All are motivated by different beliefs. Again, all motivated by insecurities at the end of the day. But the controller's need is to be the best and to win. So if you aren't the best and you're not winning, you have no purpose or value. If you are the protector, it is typically I need to be right in order to have worth or value. And the control or complier is designed around being liked. I must be liked in order to be okay and to be safe. And so you can see how those three things really do, play with the mind. And it really does change how we communicate, how we make choices, how we have relationships. It's very, very impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back to something we were talking about a minute ago. It's that masculine energy that you brought up. Both men and women have masculine and feminine energy, those attributes. And so for our audience listening, I just want to clarify that a little bit because, and I'll use myself as an example. When I was working in corporate environments, I spent a lot of time in my masculine attributes. And so that is also normal. And that's part of the ego piece as well, right? Yeah. So
and that's why we need all three. To clarify that if you're just living in feminine energy, you're playing too small. If you're just living in masculine energy, you're playing too small. It might look big, but it's small. And so when you can use all three ego types, that's why I always call it 33%, because if you're pulling 33 from your complier, that means you're caring, you're compassionate, you're thinking about the people and why they matter. You're then in the protector, which is high integrity. You speak truth. You do the right thing even when it's hard. You've got the controller who is focused on success, getting to the finish line, getting results, holding people accountable. And so when you can pull the strengths from all three egos, that's really where we are our best self. That's our authentic, best self leader, best self person. And that's where we're real. We don't have to prove ourselves because again, we've accepted that we have these ugly traits from the controller and I have to use my complier to balance her out. We've got these ugly traits from the protector and I have to pull from probably both the complier and the controller to balance it out. And when we can start to really recognize and we see weaknesses as just a tactic and it's not us, then we can actually balance it and we can make a different choice. And that's the power of this work.
Well, I love that. And where my head went when you were just saying that, it's also, again, leadership is very complex and you're leading a variety of personalities, people who have very different ego streams as well. And so it's understanding what ego stream you need to show up with in order to best manage and get the best from that individual. And I think, sometimes as leaders, we forget that, right? Because it's like, well, this is just who I am. And so therefore you need to change to meet my needs, where the reality is the leader has to be able to flex, right? To get the best out of people. That's how you're going to influence and get people moving in the direction you need them to.
Absolutely. And having all three egos on your team is what makes a balanced, successful team. If you just have people in your ego type, you're missing a whole realm of strengths. And so it is learning how to lead and coach the opposite ego, because typically those are our biggest triggers and our hardest relationships to have. And being able to learn how to communicate through that really is powerful. Freedom, a lot of times our spouses and the friendships and our family members are opposite egos than us. So that's why those relationships typically have the most drama and the hardest personal attachment, because we don't always speak the same language. We connect on our similar ego. Usually we have 1 to 2 dominant egos. And so we connect on the ego that we have in common. And that's usually where we thrive as a relationship. When those two egos, our secondary ego kicks in, it's usually the opposite. And that's when we start to butt heads and we aren't talking the same language anymore and we have friction. And so recognizing when is the ego getting in the way? When are we wanting the same thing, but we're talking a different language? The egos talk completely different. languages. The complier needs talks about people. Why do the people matter? Why does this matter to me as a human? The protector talks facts, logic. They want to know, why is this fair? Why is this, what's the real truth of this situation? And then your controller is, results and people. Tell me how we're getting the finish line. I don't care about the people. I don't care about anything else. I want to talk tasks.
Yeah.
And so when you can recognize that, I guarantee you can pinpoint why you're having an argument with certain people.
Nice, nice. Well, you also emphasize that ego, it reacts from this place of fear or pride. And so those reactions in women leaders tend to get normalized, right? It's like, oh, well, this is just how I operate. And I kind of mentioned that a minute ago. So how do you help them start to recognize those differences, right? And really utilizing that in a way that helps to influence people and not just dismiss it. Because that's kind of a dismissive, just get on board. This is the way I am. So like it or not, this is what we're doing.
Absolutely. And that's actually an ego's tactic to prevent our self-worth. And so a lot of times it's like, well, I know I do that. Or, I know I could be a jerk, or I know I messed up. But it's so shallow on the I know that it's really not taking it to where I'm going to change because of it. And I think that's what you're referring to is, how do they take it to a place of awareness? Because there's awareness and then there's ownership. So like in the academy that I run, step one's awareness. Everybody wants to fight awareness. Like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. But then they kind of write it off and they still do it. It's then that next step of ownership. Once you can own the ego and you see it, you feel it, you own it, and you understand its impact, now you can change it. Most of the time it's like, I did that. I'm really sorry. Mm-hmm. Surface level apology, not real. You're going to do it again.
Of course.
Yeah. Where if you can say
the other person knows that because they're going,
exactly. Well, here's a habit. Yes, you've probably done that a million times. That is your protection, right? That's how you've survived hard things. And so being able to just step back and say, wow, you're right. I didn't let anybody speak at the board, meeting today. And I'm really sorry for that. I would love to schedule another meeting and really hear people's opinion. And I'm just going to sit back and take notes. That's a real apology. That's a real ownership to the awareness you just got. And when we can do full circle like that, now you can start to manage the ego, because it's the ego that's making you not ask questions. It's the ego saying, I don't need anybody's feedback. We've already got the right answer. We're already going in this direction. Just get on board. And so when you can actually stop, collaborate, listen, now you've got people that you want to be on your team. Great leaders don't just have followers. They have people that are committed to them, that are loyal to them. And I think in the world that we live in right now, it's hard to find good employees. It's hard to find people that are committed to staying in a position for long term. There's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of people that just move around. And so when you can be a leader that make people not want to leave you, you're going to have that long-term, team that wants to grow their career with you. But it takes an aware leader to say, what are your goals? I think one of the things that controller, protector, actually even complier leaders, I think a lot of times the ego thinks they know what they want, what other people want. And so it's like, no, they don't really want a leadership role, or no, they're really good, so I don't want them to move. I really need them as my assistant. And so we don't invest in them. We don't give them the tools to see them grow, because we want to hoard. We want to protect. We want to take the I part of leadership to make my life easier instead of helping grow others. And so I think when you can really just slow down, figure out what other people want, that's when you're going to start really seeing your team flourish. You're going to really start seeing the ideas pour out. You're giving people permission to show up.
Yeah, that's such an important comment that you made. And we see this all the time. It's so funny. I just had the conversation this morning with a client, and she was like, well, my boss just got this acting position as head of the company. And he said to me, he wants to make sure that I'm not reporting to the person replacing him, that I stay with him. And I said, well, of course, because he sees your value and he knows you're going to protect him and do the work that he needs to get done. And that's a compliment. But to your point, it could also stall her progression, right? And so it's recognizing, is it in your best interest or that person's? And Christy, I love that you brought that up too, because I see so many leaders who are afraid for their people to be successful. And part of that is understanding, if your people are successful, that makes you even more successful, right? So it is a mental game that, yes, sure, it helps you short term, but long term, what is it actually setting up?
And, I think that's one of the biggest things. That's every time I coach a client or have an academy, that is the number one thing that is the holdup for delegation and coaching team members is the fear of being replaced, the fear that someone else can be more valuable than me. What if they don't need me anymore? That is a lie. Leadership, no one should need you. They should want you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
When you make people need you, you're creating codependent humans, whether it's your children, whether it's your spouse, whether it is your team members. If they need you, that means you're not letting them grow and be the person or meet their own potential.
Yeah.
As a leader, your job is to grow people. Your job is to make people just as good as you are, if not better. Because if you have 10 people on your team that are just as good as you or better, you now have a team that people are going, wow,
what is she doing?
Vicky is incredible leader. I don't even know what she's doing to her team. One of the things I always have with really good leaders who are good teachers, I just hate losing my team members. I grow them, I teach them, and then someone takes them away from me. And it's like, I get it. And that sucks. That is a really crummy part about being a good leader and the most flattering part about being a good leader. And so being able to recognize and see that as the biggest gift you're giving to someone, because really at the end of the day, on your 90th birthday, you're not going to think about them taking people away from you. You're going to be thinking about the 20, 30, 40, 50 people you grew into leadership roles who are doing amazing things, who you get to watch grow their career. That's the gift of great leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah. Such a legacy, right? That you're leaving with people. And when people talk about you, what are they saying? Oh, not that Vicky held me back. They're saying Vicky pushed me to excel, to get in front of, to put my hand up for these opportunities, to make sure people knew that I was interested in this. Like it's such a, yeah. And it's sad when leaders do that, right? Like, and it happens a lot.
Yeah.
It happens a lot. So
it does.
Christy, I'm cognizant of our time, but you think about the women and men who are listening, they often feel so stretched, right? Like you're getting pulled. We talked about the complexity, and especially in today's environment, like it's so much. They often get underestimated or they get stuck in these old patterns. So what's one thing they could do today that can immediately help them start to create more clarity and power, whether that's at home, as a parent, as a partner, or in your career?
I love that question. One thing is hard. I have a million. But no, one thing, I think the biggest thing is start to practice being present and being aware, because that really is step one. You can't be aware if you're not present. And you can't be, you can't grow if you're not present and aware. So I think it's getting yourself aware, being more intentional. Wake up and ask yourself, what am I going to do today? One thing to be a better boss, spouse, friend, parent, community member, leader, business partner, whatever your roles are, ask yourself, get a journal, write it down every single day. What is one thing? And that simple practice starts you to think about those little things. And then from there, then say, okay, what went wrong in that conversation? What was my part? Or what intention do I want to have for this meeting today? And not on the tactical side. This is all human stuff. And so I think a lot of times leaders are really present and conscious and intentional when it comes to tactics and tasks. This is all about the human. What is your intentions with the humans in the room? Yes, you want to accomplish this goal, but how are you going to get the humans to buy in? And I think when you just add that second layer of intention with the human perspective, it will start to shift things a little different.
Love that. Love that. And that's a micro step, right? Because I think often we get caught up in this headspace of, oh my gosh, it's so big, it's so overwhelming. And really what you're breaking it down to is micro shifts that happen every day that build to major things, right? It's major growth that you actually experience as you start to build that. And it's like a muscle, right? It's
a muscle.
You go to the gym, you're not going to walk out with major biceps unless you go every day and you keep increasing your reps or your weight. And it's the same kind of thing. It's a practice and a discipline that you get into. And
it is.
That's a huge mind thing for sure.
It is. Ego management is all about consistency and accountability. I think so many times as leaders, we get frustrated because our team's not accountable. People aren't accountable. The question is, are you accountable as a leader?
Yeah.
Are you doing the things that are making people want to be accountable? And I think that's where egos really get in the way of good leadership. We expect things from others And then we kind of become a hypocrite and we don't hold ourselves to the same level of integrity.
Love that. Love that. Wow. What a great conversation. And that went really fast.
It always does.
We could talk ego for hours, I think. So, Christy, if people have questions, how do they find you? And where do they find your book? I'm assuming Amazon, but
yes, definitely on Amazon.
Yeah, like where else? Where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, Christie Garcia, and the book, you can check out the book and get more details and all the places to purchase on my website, mindfulchoiceacademy.com/book. There you can also learn about the leadership program or the academy that I run. But I think the book is a really great place to start, whether it's for your individual use, whether it's for your team. And, it's a great conversation to have with multiple people, with your family, with your team members. But I would definitely recommend you to start there. It's an easy read and it breaks down all the different egos. It'll help you with that self-awareness and that present moment for you to get started. So highly recommend Your Ego is Showing. Amazon is the best place. We just launched 2 weeks ago. It's going really well. Nice. And would love to get any of your insight and obviously reach out. I would love having this conversation. If there's anything I can do to support you or your teams, please don't hesitate to call, reach out, and chat.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on the book and the success so far. I'm sure it will continue to grow and expand and impact people's lives. People get nervous when we talk about ego.
Yes.
We've broken it down beautifully so that people actually understand what that means, and we all have it, right? It's a common theme for all of us. It's just how do you work with what you have?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Christy, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining me. And I want to thank our audience for taking time to chime in today. Hey, if you know somebody who needs a little support on the ego, definitely share this episode with them. And if you're looking to understand your own leadership, you can visit us at Will Empowered and take our free leadership quiz. It'll give you some insight as to also how you're showing up in the world. And so thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Christy, thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you for joining us for Will Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.willempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.